Good afternoon and welcome to this Festival of Education panel session. We're going to be talking about diversity, inclusion and belonging in education and society, and I'll be chairing today. My name's Penny Rabiger, and I'll just open briefly and say how I come to this work. I'm one of the co-founders of the BAMED network. I'm a member of the Black Caribbean and BAME Achievement Group in Haringey, and I'm a coach on the Anti-Racist Schools Award led by the Centre for Race, Education and Decoloniality at Leeds Beckett University. I'm also a school governor and a trustee on a multi-academy trust board, and the mother of teenagers, so I get the lowdown from the front lines, so to speak. So I feel like I have quite a broad and focused view on the education sector and the issues around diversity, inclusion and belonging, and it's my huge pleasure and privilege to chair the panel today with such esteemed panel members. We have with us Bishop Rose Hudson-Wilkin, Dr. Angela Herbert, MBE, and Anthony Peltier. And the format of the session, you'll be able to hear from each of our panelists, and then we'll go on to some further discussion around the table. Each of our panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, and they'll be able to introduce themselves, set out their view on the state of diversity, inclusion and belonging in education and society related to their own work and life. And for participants tuning in, do use Slido for any questions you have, and we'll pick these up as we go. And there's a link at the bottom of the YouTube where you're watching. So if I could ask Rose to go first and take it away with your thoughts.
I've just unmuted myself, so I hope that I can be heard at this time. I am delighted to be with you. I'm Rose Hudson-Wilkin. I had the privilege and the pleasure to have been born, and the good fortune, I should say, to have been born and brought up in Montego Bay, Jamaica. And I say that I had the good fortune of being born and brought up in Montego Bay, Jamaica, because that was the place where I discovered who I am as a child growing up. I saw images of myself in all walks of life. And so it meant that I grew up knowing that I could become whatever I wanted to be. It was possible because I could see it. And I like to begin at that place in terms of saying, where I was born and how I was brought up. Growing up, my aunt, we were a very poor family. My aunt and the adults around me, I would always hear them saying, make sure you go to school and get your education, because when you have your education, nobody can take it away from you. I would just say that in English for the benefit of those who may not have understood my patois. Go to school, get your education, because when you have your education, it cannot be taken from you once you have got it. And this was being said to us by people who themselves were not academically educated. And that's important that we remember that. Here were people who were not themselves academically educated, but somehow they understood the value of having an education. They knew that if you had an education, it would open doors for you, even though there were lots of obstacles in the way. They believed it, and they made sure that you were sent to school and hoped that you would do the best and benefit from your education. So I was lucky then. I went to what you would probably call the nursery, but in our nursery, they're teaching you there to read and write and do all those things, and teaching you how to socialize. And then we got to school, and I was very fortunate that the schools that I attended, both primary and secondary school, that they were not just simply interested in me being educated academically. They were also interested in the kind of social education and well-being. So I was very lucky about that. I was very lucky that I had teachers who, this was more than just teaching. They weren't just there. This wasn't a job for these people. What was interesting was that those teachers had a sense of the value added that they were giving to us. And so they were really genuinely interested in us from the time we walked in through those doors. And one got a sense that they were going to go above and beyond in order for you to be educated in a way that would benefit you going forward into the future. So I then came to the UK for tertiary education. And it was very different when I came here. I came here at 18 to attend a college, and was very aware and open, I think. I was sort of wide-eyed in seeing what was happening around me. Because what I saw was diversity, yes. I should add that there were diversity in Jamaica. Growing up in Montego Bay, we were always accustomed to seeing pink people and white people and blue people and black people, and people from different nationalities. The big difference there growing up in Jamaica is that everyone identified as Jamaicans. I didn't hear anyone saying that they were Indo-Jamaicans or Chinese Jamaicans or whatever. They were Jamaicans. And it wasn't that they didn't know that they were from Chinese origins or Asian origins or any other kind of origin, but people were Jamaicans. The motto was out of many, one people. So I found it interesting that the diversity that I saw there was a kind of diversity that was actually at ease with itself. And in particular at high school, I was learning not just Caribbean history and African history and that connection, but I was also learning European history. So there was a breadth of knowledge that I was taking in, consuming. And there wasn't a sense that I was limited to just this particular kind of history or etc. So I came here for college education. I noticed that, of course, there is a diversity because I was in London. I was in Blackheath at the time, but I spent some time in the Victoria area. But I think what I noticed was that things seemed much more to be in silo, if that makes sense. Things seemed to be very much in silo. And I did not get a sense that people here were aware of the diversity of histories that made up who we are as the British people or the English people. I was also concerned at the level of exclusion, and I know we're talking about inclusion, but if we're talking about inclusion, then there is also the assumption about exclusion. So I was also aware of the significant percentage of exclusion, and also in particular those who were being excluded. And it left me as an 18-year-old, I was here for 3 years, asking questions about the society that I was a part of, and also the society that I thought that I belonged to. Questions about why were certain groups being excluded? Why were certain groups being incarcerated, for example? And actually, I believe some work has been done that signified that many of those who are incarcerated were also in the area of exclusion as well. So I think, therefore, that what I want to say to us as educators, and I still regard myself as an educator because I guess the church is involved in we have hundreds of schools, and, we began in education not only in this country, but in countries across the world. I think what I want to say about diversity and inclusion and belonging in education and society is that those of us who are engaged in educating from whatever spectrum, whether it's primary, secondary, tertiary, must actually understand that they're not just imparting an academic subject. I really think that's important. I really believe that those who are imparting their particular subject area must be able to do it in a way that helps the children who are learning understand that it is connected to real life and living. I believe that those who are involved in education, that they ought to reflect those whom they are teaching. So in other words, we need to see people from all different walks of life, from all different ethnicities involved in education. I believe that within the communities, children who are being educated need to see reflections of themselves, because it is only when they see reflections of themselves that they will immediately be able to connect, that they can become what they see, and that it is not impossible, that there are no barriers for them becoming what they see. I believe that we need to enable those we are teaching. If we're teaching maths or the science subjects, how does that relate to life? How are we teaching it in a way that is going to excite our children? And not only to excite them, but to connect with it in terms of saying, wow, this is really spoken to me. And I am keen to use this in whatever way that I'm doing in order to make a difference. And so I would encourage our educators to understand that the role that we play, it's not a job, it is a vocation where we are enabling the next generation to be the best that they can be in life. And it means, and I would implore our educators to make sure that we draw on a variety of examples in all, when we're teaching a subject, don't just reach for the nearest book. Find other textbooks that shows images of these children so that they know that people like themselves are artists, people like themselves are scientists, people like themselves are, the whole spectrum, because that will excite them even more at the possibility that they too belong to a people who have mastered and who are able and capable. We are educating for life. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That's fantastic. We're going to move on to Angela. So over to you.
Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. I'm humbled as always to be part of this event. So I will take a journey through education from my own experience. I was actually born here in the UK. My parents are from Barbados. Yay, flag there representing. My father came first. And then my mother joined him later. And we hear much about the Windrush generation and, you know, the kind of experiences where, you know, people would have to share rooms, someone would finish a shift, someone else would take that space and so on. But that was not my experience, and that was not the experience my brothers and I had. So I was born here in the UK and lived in North Acton. So I can't, like previous speaker, talk about anywhere sunny, alas, although I did visit Barbados and went to school but didn't like it. Why is that? Well, the school that I went to and where I lived, we were the only Black family on our street and in our area. And at my school, there were probably about 8, 10 maximum children that were Black. And I was raised with the understanding that we were all human, but it was always impressed upon me the importance of education, but not just education, being better than my counterparts, better than my white counterparts, because I had to make sure that I was the best. I could be the best so that I could achieve. So I went to school in North Acton. And very early on, at the age of 4 or 5, maybe 4 or 5, I was at school, and one of my friends who lived a few doors away from me called me Blackie. So in the din of the room, there was this voice saying, Blackie, Blackie, Black, but I didn't connect that Blackie was in relation to myself. So Jeffrey got right up to me and he said, Blackie. I looked up just because there was a sound coming from his voice, my friend. And then he called me by name. And so we engaged. Later on that evening, I recall having a conversation with my mother and just asked her why Jeffrey called me Blackie. And my mum, she never remembered saying this to me, but she said, oh, okay, what Jeffrey doesn't realize is that God dropped a little something special in you, which makes you your color. And straight away, I felt very sorry for Jeffrey because I wasn't supposed to share it with him. So I always felt very sorry for him because he didn't have that extra thing that was dropped into him. But the journey that I will take really is around identity. So that very poignant experience in my life, when my mother said that at 5 years old, was really significant years later as I reflect. At that school, at my primary school, every lunchtime, I would be forced to stand in a corner. So I would really eat my meal very slowly because I knew what was coming. And back then, being an older lady, the winters were very cold. And I could just remember the pain of the cold biting through my fingers and my feet. And sometimes I couldn't tell that I had tights on because I was so cold, and just longed for the sound of the bell, which would mean that I could go inside. But the heat then caused an adverse reaction because then I felt the pain. But it took a while. But every day that was my experience. And I didn't associate that with racism. And I wouldn't say that those children were racist, but to be sure, I could imagine that their families would have something to say, particularly because at that time, the immigration started to increase. The other interesting thing that happened at school, let me just go back a second. I always wondered why none of the teachers asked why I was standing there every day. Stick a pin in that and move on. education for myself and those other 8 or 10 children around us as Black people, I recall, was around slavery. My family, as I said, from Barbados. And so I remember a program on the TV with blackout curtains back then. As I said, I'm older. And the image that I always remembered was the ship with what looked like sardines all packed together. And the poignant thing about that was that they made reference to my Barbados. And so, interestingly, it presented to me a sense of hopelessness. Inadvertently, education that was supposed to free and enable, inadvertently put a blocker so that I understood there was only so much that I could ever do. So it made sense that my parents insisted that I always worked so much harder. My secondary education was on the other side of the borough. So instead of the Ealing side, it was in Brent. And the school I went to then was actually saturated with people that looked like me. But interestingly, I was different because I didn't come from their feeder schools. I was an outsider. I didn't have the same experiences as them. So then I had to deal with yet another experience by being among people that were like me, but not actually understanding me because of my primary education. In my secondary school, however, there was a teacher. His name is Mr. Hillier. He was my form tutor and remained my teacher up until I left school. This individual was very influential and had a huge part to play in my life then. So he always saw the best in me. And when other children were messing about, and I was reasonably quiet, I was the long socks, glasses, and goofy kid. And he always encouraged me. He always said that I was brilliant. There was always something. And so this gentleman, who I still maintained connection with post my formal education. I went on to college, and then at age 24, I had an experience, a light on the road to Damascus experience, where I became a born-again Christian. And through that, I started volunteering in prison. And in prison, like my secondary school, there was a disproportionate number of people from my community. And again, it was another experience of having to learn and understand experiences, and that key theme that ran all the way through my own childhood and through my educational experience, through college, where again I was the only Black person in my class and experienced a number of disproportionate sanctions or bias, shall I say. And so then into the prison education system, where I volunteered for 12, 13 years, I decided I wanted to get into education formally, because I did a lot of work in the community, but I wanted to get into education formally because I felt that education had a way of freeing one's mind. Throughout my education and academic experience, I have encountered I've encountered racism. Even throughout my career, I've encountered racism. And has it been an overwhelming feature in my life? I'd say it has. Has it been a disabling feature in my life? It has not. Because despite every piece of education around people that look like me being slavery, there's something about being able to free one's own mind through the methods that are available through learning, reading, research, engaging with others, and also learning from others. And that's a really powerful thing. So it does not disable me as an individual. However, throughout my career, I could see how disproportionality and how thoughts of cognitive dissonance, where people believe that they are, and any other view that anyone else has is not important. I could see how disabling that can and has been, and these are observations. But the powerful thing about being educated and then going through my career, where I did study to be a teacher, and I did my degree in education and training, and my master's in education management, and then finally my professional doctorate, which is now in prison education. The one theme that linked throughout my whole experience to date was identity. Identity. So the few drops that God put into me that made me me was really powerful. And I used that inadvertently throughout my career to say to people, wherever they were from, whoever they were, that there was something very special about them. And it wasn't necessarily that God dropped something special, but that we are unique. And so the one thing that I have always utilized, and through my doctorate as well, I utilize that notion of identity. So identity is who am I? And not necessarily being able to connect back to where I was born, or the sunny, shores of Barbados, but about who I am now, and capturing all the things that I've shared about myself, because that's an education. And I used all of that learning with my children and others that I have hundreds of children, people that I've encountered over the years, and being able to impart that learning of that something unique about that and us as individuals. So society, I would say, still has a lot of lessons to learn, because historically there is that notion that there are those that are better and those that should not be. But in my view, we all have an important and significant part and role to play. In education, it's even more powerful, because you can, as an educator, you can enable and empower, or you can disable and prevent. And so the challenge for us as individuals is to actually recognize what society is saying, and the pictures that are presented through the media on a daily basis. Do we take that on board, or do we actually challenge ourselves? And when we can challenge ourselves, then the experiences of those that are learning are going to be so much richer, because from every individual, there is something exceptionally unique and special. When I was 21, I moved to Greece. I lived there for a couple of years. Don't ask me why. I was teaching English, but why would I go to Greece? I didn't speak the language. I didn't understand the culture. I just went because I was tired of England. I wanted something different. And that's what I did. And the interesting thing about that experience, thank you. The interesting thing about that experience is that I was in a different culture, and I had to learn from the ground up. And so that is in effect what I believe that as educators we do. We get into those experiences, we learn from the ground up, and then what we deliver is far richer. I hope you found that interesting.
Thank you so much. We're going to move swiftly on to Anthony. Don't forget to unmute, Anthony.
I'm usually good at unmuting. Very unusual. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for having me. It's been really interesting just listening to the stories of my colleagues, and my story is slightly different. I was born and bred in Yorkshire, and then I arrived in Hackney at the age of 11. So sounding like a Yorkshireman is far worse than being black. Trust me, it was scared out of me. So within 3 weeks of arriving in Hackney, I was a well-versed Cockney, and that was my saving grace. But once that had passed, the experiences that we've just heard also came my way. The expectation for black boys in Hackney in the 70s wasn't the best. There was no expectation that we should achieve or become. So for me, because I was a bit of a bookworm and I read a lot of books. It was an unusual sight for my teachers to see me working and reading. I was a scientist at heart. I love science, and I'm grateful and I'm honoured that my children also follow my passion for science and also higher education. So I was the first one in my entire family to graduate, and my dad as a Dominican, and a Dominican that believed that his destiny was to populate the world, and had 15 children, and that was one of 15 that graduated, and then my sister followed. So we kind of set an expectation for our own children just through the fact that we crossed that line. But my journey, as I say, wasn't a simple journey. It was a very difficult journey, and because being a young black boy, 6 foot plus in Hackney, you always seem to be a target no matter where you sat. You seem to be a target when you walk down the streets of Hackney as a 6 foot plus black man. Because no matter what, as soon as we start to show some facial hair, we become men, even though we're still boys. And at that time, my brother, who was 2 years older than me, had already been arrested for SUS, the law which was designed to stop, search, arrest, and prosecute black men, black boys. So I kind of watched that journey. I watched that whole of racism, from not just within my place of safety being school, but in probably one of the worst estates in London, the Kingsman estate in Hackney. Did that stop me? Of course it didn't stop me. It kind of fueled me, and I looked at myself as a Superman, a super person with powers that no one else had but I, and I used those powers to guide me on the right path. At the age of 18, after successfully going through one of the toughest comprehensive schools in Hackney, I decided to join the Metropolitan Police Service. Yes, in 1979, I was crowned police officer. And in those days, we were few and far between. And it was a difficult journey. Unfortunately, the disadvantage about being grown up in an estate in Hackney where we worked together, yes, there was racial conflict between the blacks and the whites in Hackney on the estate. We'd see it happen in the courtyards, but we grew a level of resilience to deal with lots of other things. So actually growing up through racism, I learned skills and I had strategies to combat that, but I didn't have strategies to combat that in the police service because I had no strategies because the police were the power. And I was just one small pawn on a very large chessboard. I lasted 2.5 years, and then I left after being assisted to leave because I couldn't cope with the level of racism in the organisation. But more importantly, I wasn't prepared to take the level of racism in the organisation. So I went to university and I read education, and I achieved my Bachelor of Education, and I went to school as a teacher. Because I knew if I couldn't change, because my real reason for joining the police was to fight the war from the inside, not from the outside. I believed that. I believed at 18, I'll join the police service because I wanted to not allow people like my brother to be stopped and searched and arrested and convicted of a crime they didn't commit. So I thought, I'm going to fight from the inside. Little did I know, I was fighting a war with only one person, and that was me. So I decided to go to education. I thought to myself, if I could educate young people and stop them from committing crimes and becoming a statistic of the authorities in policing, then I've done something well. So I went to education, and my destiny was always to be a head teacher, never just to be a teacher. I knew I had to cut my teeth in the classroom as a teacher, but I went to university to become a head. There was no such course to become a head, but my passion, aspiration was to be a head teacher. I went to university in 1989, a 4-year degree in 93, and I was crowned a head teacher in 2000. In 7 years, I achieved my first headship. Wasn't an easy step, so I had to go through 4 interviews before I got the first one. And I was being interviewed along people that were nowhere as experienced, qualified, and understood leadership like I did. But I was appointed a head teacher in 2020. So for me, I knew that was my vocation. I knew that I was in the ultimate position to change the world, change the outcomes for young people, and that I did. And from the first day I became a head teacher, the first thing I made sure never happened in my school was Black History Month. That went, because I believe Black history was a subject that should be around 12 months of the year, not 1 month of the year. And I've heard all the stories about it helps us recognize, but actually in a school of learning, you don't need to be minimalizing the achievements of people into 1 month, which in effect is really 1 week in that month. So I started, don't get me wrong, I've got a lot of opposition from Black parents and from white families, because Black History Month was always something we did. And we enjoyed it because we got to taste different foods from all the world. We got to talk about Mary Seacole again, and we got to talk about all the things that we regurgitated every single year. I decided to build a curriculum that recognised the achievements of many across the year. And I did that, and I changed behaviours. In 2013, I thought, it can't be me just doing this. Well, there are others like me that were doing what I was doing. But we wanted to do something greater and bigger than that. So a colleague of mine called Samson, we decided to write a framework, a diversity framework for schools to help schools do what we did. And we wrote that in 2013. And there's a number of schools that follow that framework. It's not a publicly wide document. It's not been advertised and marketed. It's not about that. It's about change. It's about how we can support each other to support change. Because change, what we do for our young people today, they're going to make a difference in the future, because we are at the end of our road. I am anyway. I'm at the last part of my journey, but my children are going to be the change agents of the future. They're the ones that are going to create the society that we are working to lay seeds for. We can just support them, and we can just stand by them, and we can just hold them up when times are hard. That's our change piece, but they will be the change agents of the future. So the work that I'm doing now is, our first young person that went through the mark in 2013 is now in university. We've written a framework for higher education, and we're currently working on a framework for universities as well. But we have got 3 other frameworks that we've built around public sector diversity and Innovate for Growth as part of that development. And together we intend to change the world through education. Because we never stop learning. No matter how old we are, we never stop learning. And if we stop teaching, we stop changing. We stop teaching young people, older people, we stop the change that we need to see in a society where everybody feels valued and everybody doesn't have to walk and look over their shoulder every time they open their mouth, every time they do something, every time they apply for a job. So for us, we are about how do we support others to change? How do we support organisations to change? How do we come together collectively to bring forward change? And that's the kind of work I am working on now. So my journey in education has been amazing. I've loved it. I'm still in education supporting head teachers now currently, but my real passion now is about changing for the future and changing the world that I won't get to see, but my children will. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much to all 3 of you. And I think it's obvious that your formative years have had an impact on your choices of careers. You're all educators in your own right, in fact, and all trying to make the world a better place. And I think I've heard that, encountering racism seems to have been a feature in your lives as British citizens. But as you said, Angela, it's not a disabling factor. It's spurred you on to centre yourself through your identity and even look for connections with others through their identities. And I think I've heard really strongly that expectations are important, that family have been vital to that, and that schools should be setting high expectations for every child. And then the final thing that I think I picked up from all 3 of you is that not only do you have to see it to be it, but also for each of you, you need to be in it to change it from the inside. And I think I'd like to start there with a question. Anthony, I think you're known for saying that diversity, inclusion and belonging is dependent on organisational behavioural change, and you say from the sky to the ground. Where have you seen this work well in the sector that you work in? Do you want to start us off?
Yeah, of course. I've seen it work in obviously the schools I've worked in. Obviously, every headship I've had, I've ensured that I mean, my first headship, it was a 97% white British school. And I think I was one of 2 black members of staff when I arrived. By the time I moved on to my second challenge, so I see every headship as a next challenge, because I set the conditions for improvement and let somebody else step in and take it to the next level. Our staff team would increase, and so did our pupil, because parents brought their children to our school. So that was amazing. But what it also did, it changed our community. It changed the community because people didn't realise that, they didn't see there wasn't many black children in the school until black children arrived. And then the community had changed. So I've seen that change. I haven't seen the change at the top end of the education hierarchy, because still it's a very, very, very white leadership structure across the whole piece. And where there are black heads, they are few and far between. So there is a lot of work still to be done around how we systematically work through the organisational structures to enable a breadth of people representative of the students that they teach every single day. And that's the work that we are trying to do. And not just myself and Angela, because Angela and I work closely together, but a lot of people around us are on the same journey to push forward that change. It's not a glass ceiling. There's not a ceiling there to break through. It's the opportunities are not being created for the people who are rightly fit and proper to do those jobs. But for some reason or the other, there's still some barriers, and we're working our way through that. And I hope that some of the strategies that are coming through from different frameworks and different race equality programs, and we know the Race Equality Agenda 2010, the Act, saw very little change in the years it was pushed out. And we can go back to the 80s when we had the whole change on anti-racism. We didn't see the impact of that work. So we're hoping now that the people that are fighting for this kind of change are people of colour, as well as people that are not of colour. And there's a lot of people that are driving for this agenda. So I think we've still got time to see some real change.
Thank you. Angela, do you want to speak to that point? Because, in the criminal justice system, how have you seen this working well, this organisational behavioural change?
Like other agencies, government, etc., it's very slow, and all the recent programs that have been delivered time and again. I mean, change has not happened, not as fast as one would expect. However, my children or my grandchildren should not have the same experiences, and that's my driver really, so that they don't have to. But sadly, my own daughter has had to take issue with with industry on racism, and actually having to experience that, having to challenge an organization through a tribunal. To have my daughter do that, it means that change is yet to happen. The criminal justice is very disproportionate in terms of those that are users of the system, and that funnels all the way through. But my notion is a whole organization approach, and that's what I use. I cannot hide in my industry because I'm the only one that kind of looks like me, and so I can't hide and say it was someone else. And so I use my difference as my strength. And so it's about being accountable and also responsible, and not just because people look like me, because most don't, but it's also allies and working together. So there are little pockets of change that take place. And I make a quick reflection back to my childhood in Sunday school. Jesus bids us shine with a pure, clear light. I'm sure Rose will be clapping there somewhere. Like a little candle burning in the night, you in your small corner and I in mine. So the idea is that we all do our bit everywhere, and somehow we will be able to get a flame going. And that's my aspiration. And that's what I think that's how I think change can happen.
Thank you. And I can see Rose singing along there. So Rose, there's work to be done in the church for sure. What have you seen working well in terms of organisational behaviour change, or
yes,
not, as the case may be?
I think, as I've always said, when people say the church is racist or the police are racist, I would always say, but if the church and the police are racist, it's because the society in which we live in is also racist. And so the church or the police or any other organizations aren't just an alien group who happen to be displaying that behavior. So yes, like everywhere else, human beings, being what they are, display the kind of behavior that, of course, is born out of ignorance. And so it is about educating them. What we have now in the church is a real serious stepping forth in addressing the issues and trying to create the kind of change. It is tiring for those of us who labor in the vineyard, whether it be theologically or in teaching or in science or whatever field. It is hard work. Pardon me, it is hard work, constantly trying to educate. But as my colleagues have said, we do it, and I do it with a sense of joy because my children and my grandchildren are here, and I want the society that they're growing up in to be a better one. So we continue to labor in this, hoping that people will hear what is being said and will change their lives, their way of behaving. And what I hope that I do, and I think my brother Anthony and my sister Angela, I'm sure they do in their own way too, is to say to the world, without saying it to them up front, we're normal and we're human. And because we're normal and human, we're just going to go about life. You have a problem with that. Okay, I will help you address that. But we want to be in that space of normality. We're not a different species, and we want our children and our grandchildren also to be in that space of normality. And so we do everything to make sure that the change that we want to see, we become that change, and we work for that change.
Thank you. And I think each of you really models that with such dignity and respect as well in your work. I think we've got a few more minutes left of the session, and I think the people that are joining us would really benefit from hearing your thoughts on what you'd like to say to the education sector in terms of like, what should the education sector do more of, or do less of, take note of, or take away from your rich experience, your lived experience, your experience throughout your careers, and your thoughts on where you're going to next in your worlds. Anthony, do you want to kick us off with some
I will do.
words?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I just want to say to the education sector, look, we've written 6 frameworks that touch young people from the early years to older people in the boardrooms. We know what organisational change should look like and should feel like. If you want to secure full inclusion, it's the only way you can eradicate school exclusion. Full inclusion results in nil exclusions. And that's what I'm going to say. Focus on inclusion. If focus on inclusion for all, we'll have less young people walking our streets being excluded from schools.
Thank you. Rose, would you like to go next?
I think if I had something to say or of value, I would want to say to those who are in that area of leadership where they are setting the agenda for our schools is make sure that our syllabuses that we are teaching are of such that it teaches all our children to become more human. If we can teach our children to be human, then it is, and it comes back to, you might think, oh, she's drawing on her faith, but I have to, because it is who I am. It is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. So if we truly loved ourselves, then we would recognize that the person next to us in that seat or in the next classroom are as fully human as we are, and we would endeavor to treat them in that fully human way. So, let's educate our folks so that they know that they can become more human and teach others to be human too, relate to others in that human way.
Thank you so much. Angela.
Okay, so I'm going to make it a little funky right now. So I'm going to say, if you don't know, you better ask somebody. So it's very difficult to know, well, what do you do? We hear, right, we've got to make sure that we're inclusive, etc. And how do we meet the needs of those little Black children or those little Asian children or whatever? Well, we kind of use the same models as how we include other groups, other protected characteristics that seem to be so much easier. But if you don't know, ask. There are programs that are there that you can access. And I think one of the things that is very difficult in education, if you ask someone, it appears that you are foolish or you're not as bright as you ought to be. But the idea is to ask, because everyone's on this journey. And I'm not really promoting race. I'm promoting respect, self-respect, and decency. And if I'm respectful and decent to myself, I'm likely to do the same for others. I'll just add very quickly that Mr. Hillier is actually a white gentleman, and in very important areas in my life, he has represented my father who passed away. So it doesn't have to be Black, doesn't have to be white, it needs to be human and exude real decency, respect, and love. That's me.
Thank you so much. And just a small one for you, Anthony, that everyone's asking about these frameworks and how do they get their hands on your frameworks. So do you want to just quickly speak to that? Not forgetting to unmute.
I'm forgetting to unmute. Yeah. Just visit www.diversitymark.com. Put your contacts in the contacts, and someone at the other end of the line will send you whichever framework that you want to look at. Now, the older frameworks, the one for public sector, private sector, and third and voluntary sector, they are institutionally Black aware foundation frameworks, and that's a massive shift from diversity in schools to institutionally Black awareness in business and in public sector. So that's available via the Innovate for Growth website.
Hello.
Okay, so we've got about a minute left, so it's left me to say thank you so much for your input. We can see from people engaging with the questions that they've taken away a lot from it, and I'm sure that people will be able to follow up with you and track you down and continue the conversation. And there are some other sessions throughout the festival that touch on some of the issues that we've been talking about here, so we can continue the conversation that way as well. So thank you so much to all three of you for your valuable time, your incredible inputs, and it just is left for me to say thank you, Bishop Rose Hudson-Wilkin, Dr. Angela Herbert, MBE, and Anthony Peltier. Anthony, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I've just seen a question, and the question says, how could somebody who's white teach about diversity? Anybody can teach about diversity. It doesn't need to be a person of color. It needs to be a person of understanding.
Yeah.
And then you can deliver.
Thank you.
Coming back to being human.
Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much.
It's my great honour to welcome you all.
It is a very prestigious award. It means the world to me.
They have great senses of humour.
I like to
reveal parts of history to them, for I love making history come alive.
They are some of the best people that you can come across.
To help them open their hearts.
I always come back to this quote: how can we be role models to learners if we're not learners ourselves?
It's quite useful to get out of our bubbles, not our COVID ones, and sort of see what else is out there.
By sharing best practice, we can see the whole picture. We can see what really matters.
One of the biggest brains around.
It's easy to forget how much has to happen behind the front lines.
As a global schools group, Cognita educates over 55,000 students across 12 countries. We're proud to be Wellbeing Partner at this year's Festival of Education, and we want to share the work that we're doing to prioritise children's well-being. This starts with a clear understanding of what well-being is. We looked at the evidence and created a simple Be Well Charter that everyone can use day to day. It gives a clear definition of well-being and then focuses on the specific contributors that influence it. Discover our full Be Well Charter video and other resources to use with your students and families at cognita.com.
I really try to not look at myself as just a science teacher. I feel like as a teacher, it's very important to help students grow and develop outside of your lessons. A single teacher believing in you and really believing in you. One teacher doing that can have a large impact, but if you have one or two or three all telling you that and really, really believing in it, it makes you feel like you can achieve anything in the world, honestly.